Today I'm going to be showing you some tips and tricks and advice that you can use while you're looking at buying a used older car. Now, got a 3rd gen Firebird behind me, 89 model, and well, I'm going to go over some things you can look for to help you out so that you can make a good deal. We'll start under the hood. Now, running the VIN code, this tells me that this is an LB9, which is a 305 TPI, which carburetor swap now. They couldn't keep it running enough to test drive it, so I took a chance on it. Obviously, since they swapped, I want to make sure they didn't do a hack job and cut all the wiring, which the wiring's here, so it's not a hack job per se. So it looks like it's decently well done, and if I want to go back to a TPI, I can. Now, of course, everybody always checks your oil. Now, you don't want brand new oil because that's not going to tell you a lot of things. Old, worn out oil tells you if that's ever used oil, if it's low, if there's any contaminants in it, because a fresh oil change, it's going to look perfect usually. And you can always take a little bit on your fingers and feel it for grittiness. Make sure there ain't no grittiness on the dipstick. Obviously, also making sure there is no moisture. Now, the transmission. Now, usually you check transmission with it running and up to temp, but you always want to make sure there is some on the dipstick. Even if you don't or not able to test drive it, as long as you have something on the dipstick, that's at least a half decent sign. You may not be able to drive the car, but you know there's fluid in it, rather than being completely empty, and well, then there could be chances of a lot of things. Also, with transmission fluid on the dipstick, you can see the quality of the fluid. You can see if there's any small particles. You can also smell it and smell if it's burnt or not. Same with the oil. You can smell it too if it looks fishy to you, and smell burnt oil, as if there's a lot of metal on metal contact in there. That's not a good sign. Of course, you want to check the brake fluid, the overflow, and of course the radiator cap, because this one was leaking around here and looked like it's foaming a little bit, like there's air in the system somewhere. So, inspecting the cap, the seal is actually damaged, allowing it to seep out and get some air. And while we're talking about the engine, if you are suspicious of a blown head gasket, obviously checking the oil for moisture, like I said, but also with the car running, you can come back here, put your hand on the exhaust, wait a couple seconds, and see if there's any moisture on it. Now, don't get it confused with condensation, because condensation can be normal, but a sweet smelling, slightly green or orange colored moisture on your hand could be a sign of a failing head gasket. Also, keep in mind, the reason I couldn't test drive it was because the engine wouldn't idle very well. Now, I could probably do a quick diagnosis and possibly get it to idle better while I'm looking at the car, but I don't want to idle it up and make it idle better and then, you know, screw up my negotiating plans. Now, looking at this setup, I can tell it wasn't done the best. We have a fuel pressure regulator over there off factory line using a factory electric fuel pump. Regulator, good idea. You need it. There's no fuel pressure gauge to set the fuel pressure regulator off of. Could be causing issues. This return spring, rigged up and nasty. The throttle cable is zip tied onto the throttle bracket. So, who knows what else is wrong here? Because we got several vacuum things moving around. Could be a vacuum issue. Could be something simple. But being I couldn't drive it, that was something to give me a little bit of leverage on. Of course, a pet peeve of mine is plug wires. I hate it when plug wires are ran an awful mess, and these are. So one of the first things I did was, when I got to look at the car, I wanted to make sure that none of these are actually right up on the exhaust manifold. This one was close, but it wasn't hidden. In fact, I wasn't going to drive it very far, except for drive it around in my backyard from the front after it came off the rollback. Wasn't worried about it, but that kind of gives me something to watch for, because if it did end up having a miss in it and no one could figure it out, it's very possible it could be from that. Now, of course, tire wear. Let me get down here and look at the tire, and you'll want to feel and see how it feels on both sides, because it's kind of hard to see inside there, especially on a car. Hard to see how the tread looks, because what you don't want to come across or to know ahead of time is if the front end is out of alignment. So if one side is worn over the other, obviously if you're getting really flat here, you know there's an issue with the front end. But that's not to say someone didn't swap back to front. So always make sure you check all four, just get a good quick glance, make sure everything's good. Now in this car's case, you see this 5.0 liter fuel injection, which is accurate, and it says Formula 350. That kind of threw some flags to me. And right there it says F, which is Firebird. W was for Trans Am and Formula. So I know it's just a base Firebird. Not a big deal breaker for me. Now, door gaps is the thing to look for, but also how well these doors shut and if they sag. Which will give you a good indication of how well it's taken care of. Now, these could have been replaced at some point, but it shuts pretty easy. So, and you can see that lines up really good, and it is filthy and dirty, but they look like the factory pins, so that is a good sign. In the interior here, we'll look at this old style gauge, which most people are more familiar with a digital. Now, they claim 91,000 original miles, and it's kind of hard to tell without service records, but that number is always going to be a little off. What I was always taught is that all these are evenly lined up, like they're all nice and neat in order across. It hasn't been rolled over yet. So it's very possible that this is actually accurate. Now, of course, that don't mean someone didn't take the speedometer out of a much nicer car that had been wrecked and put in here, but that's something to look for. Now, of course, T-tops. T-tops, well, they can make or break it. So one thing I do when I look at T-tops is I'll unlatch them, and what I'll do is kind of lift up right here, and I'll try to peek back behind the seals where possible and see if there's any rot or rust, which in this case there is not there. Now, granted, you know, when you're looking at someone's car, you're not going to be able to pull all that rubber seam out. They'll probably get upset, but you can kind of take a quick peek, look around it, and if it's rained recently, feel around the edges, see if you feel any moisture, any wetness in the headliner. And of course rust. You want to check for rust, and usually lower spots where most people will miss it. Sometimes you don't really have to crawl under the car if you don't want to. If it feels smooth, no bubbles, you're probably alright. See if there's any dirt on it. There's probably a few little tiny bubbles starting right there. Not a lot. That can be saved really quick, really easy. We'll look back here, and it's pretty good. Another spot to check for rust is underneath here in the trunk, because these seals will go bad. Water gets inside the trunk lid and it can rot that out. Now, of course, you can also check the door gaps and the hinges on the passenger side, but usually the passenger side seat, door panel, and the door will be in better shape because, you know, someone's always getting in the driver's side. So when you look at the pins, you can look at the seat, how much wear is in there, and there's really not as much as the driver's side. And when we shut it, it shuts real easy. And of course we got another line down here. So now in a perfect world, it would be best to always test drive if you can, so you can feel the steering, suspension, how the transmission shifts, all that good stuff. But that's not always the case. Now, my case was I could hear it run, but I convinced them to let me drive the car forward enough off a concrete slab for my rollback driver to pick it up. That way, at least I knew the car would move under its own power before I paid for it. Or, well, basically we're trying to negotiate a better price. And of course, I'm sure there's other things to look for too that I forget to mention, because every time I go look at a car, I don't remember exactly everything. I don't carry around a list and hold it around and check it off while I'm looking at a car, because that feels weird. Oh, don't kick the tires. That's a joke. But yeah, test everything. Electric windows, test them. This has the electric mirrors, tested them, they worked. The latch button for the hatch, clicked it, it worked. So I tried everything I could on the car. Now if you have someone with you, or the seller is willing to, check all the lights, turn signals, brake lights, all that while you're there. Obviously, dash lights can be hard to see if it's not dark out, and odds are you don't want to look at a car in the dark. That doesn't always turn out very good. And I hope this little video helps you out in your endeavors in going and buying an older car. And as always, thanks for watching.